We are very pleased to welcome our first guest, Mitchell Hora, who is founder and CEO of Continuum Ag. Mitchell, welcome to our conference and thanks for joining us.
Happy to
I'll
be here,
start.
guys.
Thanks. Now, I'll start it off with just a question, and then I'll pass it over to Peter for some additional questions. But to start out, can you give us a short background of yourself, your company's operations, and also focus on how low-carbon ethanol and sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, are connected to your business strategy and outlook?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Number one, I'm a farmer. I'm seventh generation farmer in Southeast Iowa. Where the farm is located is Ainsworth, Iowa. It's a town of about 600 people. My family's been farming here in Iowa for 151 years, primarily corn, soybeans. We're operating just north of 1,000 acres here, my family and myself. I started the company back in 2015. The company is Continuum Ag. I started as an agronomy consulting company, but today we very much are a software company helping farmers to quantify their carbon intensity scores. And it's essentially quantifying the carbon intensity of the feedstocks for these new biofuels. So we're primarily focused on corn and soybeans, and that corn and soybeans going into ethanol or biodiesel, and ultimately all the way to sustainable aviation fuel in some cases. But where we come in is helping the farmers, providing them the MMRV for carbon intensity. So that's carbon market speak. MMRV is the measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verification. So that's what we do. And our business model is the farmer pays us. We're currently $7 per acre. It's an annual fee. So the farmer pays us $7 an acre. They utilize our software, which is at topsoil.ag. And they integrate their data into our software. We get them their carbon intensity score using the GREET model and the GREET feedstock calculator, score them field by field. And then we get that third-party verified using the ISO 14064 standard and an accredited third-party verifier. So that way, as 45Z kicks off here on January 1, 2025, our farmers have verified CI certificates representing every bushel of their production. Then those certificates can be utilized by biofuel producers to generate the 45Z tax credit. So the business has changed tremendously, but really at the end of the day, our mission is to help 1 million family farms improve their profitability from improving their soil health. And I've been looking at the carbon space for a long time, and 45Z is by far the biggest opportunity for agriculture, in particular sustainable ag, and an amazing opportunity for collaboration.
Okay, thanks, Mitchell. That's a great introduction. Let's sort of bring this to the level of, say, farmer, which is essentially your client. So
Yep.
let's pretend I'm a farmer. I've got, say, 500, 1,000 acre farm, and I've never heard of climate smart agriculture. Maybe there's not many that will say that anymore. I'm not sure, but why should I care about carbon intensity? Like, what's my potential economic benefit here as a farmer to understand this? And if there is a benefit, like, where does that trickle in from?
Yeah. I actually do believe a lot of farmers are starting to understand more of these practices. They might not understand the term climate smart agriculture, but understanding the soil health principles, understanding the concept of building soil health, and they definitely know what cover crops and what no-till is. What cover crops are, what no-till is. They definitely understand the practices. But yeah, now it's an opportunity to quantify what we are doing and really be able to tell our story. So how it's going to work, especially for 45Z, and I'll talk specifically about ethanol here for this example, but today in the US, a gallon of ethanol has a carbon intensity score of about a 55. National average is actually about 53, according to the Renewable Fuels Association, but call it a 55. Today, the corn is given a default CI score of 29.1. So 29.1 of the 55, meaning on the farm, we're more than half of the equation. Farmers have never really quantified their carbon footprint before. Very much this carbon intensity concept is brand new. I didn't know anything about it before the Inflation Reduction Act passed in August of 2022. But when I jumped into it, it was really the light bulb moment where I could actually quantify my real carbon footprint. I could quantify it on a per bushel basis. And we are now doing this for free for farmers in our platform, topsoil.ag, where we're getting farmers their carbon intensity score for free and then giving them insights as to how to lower their score. For most of the counties in the country, The best way to lower your score is use a cover crop. Second best is utilize manure. Third best is reduce your tillage, in particular to use no-till or strip till. And then there's a lot of other things that move the needle as well. Less fertilizer, especially synthetic nitrogen, improve your yield, less pesticide, less diesel fuel, all those kind of things. So farmers now, what I like about it is it gives a farmer a scoreboard for their sustainable ag practices, and we give them insights about how to improve their score. And because of 45Z, for the first time, there's a new financial incentive that rewards farmers for scoring points. The point system up to this has always been just yield and get more yield, more yield, more yield, and you get paid by the bushel. So we were incentivized to produce more yield, and we're pretty darn good at it. But now we need to produce more with less and be more sustainable. And now there's finally a scoreboard for that where farmers can be compensated. I don't want to go into too much of the details here, but the quick and dirty of 45Z is the biofuel producer earns 2 cents per point per gallon. For sustainable aviation fuel, it's higher, but for ethanol, 2 cents per point per gallon. You multiply the 2 cents by the conversion ratio of bushels in to gallons out, which on average is 2.9 gallons of ethanol per bushel of corn. So 2 cents times 2.9 is 5.8 cents per point reduced per bushel of corn. 5.8 cents. So every point that the farmer lowers their score is worth 5.8 cents, or a shareable 5.8 cents. We have scored over 340 million bushels of corn, which represents about 2 million acres of production. And the average CI score is 11.1, which is an 18-point reduction from the baseline of 29.1. 18 points at 5.8 cents is $1.04 per bushel in shareable value. Today, corn's only worth $4 a bushel, just north of $4 a bushel. So we are talking serious financial impact for ag and biofuels to share, plus an opportunity, of course, for further decarbonization, collaboration, and building new markets.
And how exactly, when you mentioned about sort of sharing that, like how is that profit sort of shared, or the credit kind of shared,
Yeah.
downstream to upstream, upstream to downstream along the supply chain? How does that work, and how do you kind of
Well, we're
allocate
recording this
that?
in
Yeah.
December of 2024. So the real answer is it's not right now. It's not even happening yet. We're doing this before the tax credit even starts. But
Right.
what I believe, there's a couple key things that I can share. Number one, we've got to have transparency. And I believe that capitalistic system here, it's going to work itself out to provide an equitable share amongst the different stakeholders that are involved, namely the farmers, the biofuel producer, and then there's going to be some cost, right? For the verification, the data, cost of capital, resell of the tax credits, because these are transferable tax credits. They're not refundable, but you can sell them in the secondary market if you have excess credits to sell. So how it'll work though, is the farmer creates the bushels and creates the data early part of the year. So for fuel that's going to be produced in 2025, we already harvested the corn. We already harvested the soybeans. They're already in the bin. Some of them already sold. So we've already done the harvesting. We've already grown the crop. We've already collected the data. Now what the biofuel producer is buying is the data, because when the biofuel producer needs to run their carbon intensity score or their life cycle analysis, they need to understand the data about their bushels in their supply chain. It's called their scope 3 carbon footprint, or a component of their scope 3 carbon footprint. So what the biofuel producer is buying, we call them CI certificates, where you have 1 certificate per bushel. At the beginning of the year, every single one of your bushels has a default CI certificate or a default CI score of 29.1. What you need to do is buy lower carbon certificates that then, on a weighted average basis, offset the 29.1 and thus lower your CI score as a weighted average basis throughout the tax year. So it's going to take serious volume. The typical ethanol plant is buying 40 million bushels of corn a year, is kind of an average one, or a figure a plant that's a little bit more than 100 million gallons of ethanol a year. They'd be looking at 40 million certificates in the entire US ethanol industry. There's 5.4 billion bushels that goes to ethanol every year. 5.4 billion bushels. That's about a third of the US corn crop. So we are talking lots of bushels, lots of data, lots of certificates that need to be produced. The farmers are selling the certificates. The biofuel producers are utilizing that certificate to create the tax credit.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So maybe this kind of leads to the next question, sort of, from your perspective, this is probably, even you said yourself, you just started switching onto this just, maybe a couple of years ago. And I'm curious kind of where you stand right now. Like, how well aware do you think like the average sort of, farmer is in terms of what we just talked about? And, is this, are farmers talking about the transformational impact of things like low carbon ethanol and sustainable aviation fuel and what that means for rural communities? Or is it still kind of, early in the game? Or, are farmers laser focused today on these biofuel policy reviews, which may be, getting underway in Washington soon, like 45Z tax credits? Is that kind of front and center, or is it something where they still, you still need to kind of get out there a bit more and kind of spread the news? Yeah.
They're definitely becoming more aware, and I think we've contributed a heck of a lot to it. I'm flying to another conference here later today. It'll be my 49th speaking event of the year so far. I'll end up this year over 50 in-person speaking events.
Yeah.
Plus, we do at least a weekly podcast. So I've got 50 some podcasts that I've produced this year myself, plus being on lots of other podcast stuff and everything we're doing on social media. Like, we are definitely pushing to educate as many folks as we can, and they're definitely paying attention. We're developing a really great following. We've scored, like I said, 340 million bushels. That's almost 2,000 farmers. Now we have a long way to go, but still 340 million bushels scored. The next closest competitor, at least to my knowledge, has only scored about 100 million bushels. So we are very much being aggressive at educating, but there definitely is a long way to go. I would point out, I think there's been a little bit of confusion when it comes to some of these decarbonization efforts, okay? And in particular, some of this stuff with the carbon pipelines and carbon capture. I think that's been a little bit confusing to farmers. There's been some negative headlines that I think they've kind of latched onto, right? With eminent domain and some of these carbon capture things. That's kind of deterred farmers from this conversation, when in reality, decarbonizing biofuels, building a sustainable aviation fuel supply chain and a market opportunity, this is what's going to make ag profitable and an opportunity for the decades to come. We need to move more in this direction. But I think also where some of the industry has messed up is it's not a one approach to decarbonization. We need all of it. So we need carbon capture, whether that be pump it in a hole in the ground or utilize the CO2. We need more renewable energy, and we need the low carbon crops. And it's not one or the other. It's all of the above. And I believe that once the money starts flowing here, early part of 2025, that farmers will really loosen up to the idea. More and more of them coming to the table, because this by far is the biggest financial opportunity that we are seeing for ag. And at least in my perspective, the outlook on agriculture outside of these programs, it looks pretty rough going for the next couple of years. So I think the money that could be coming from these tax credits, it's really going to make a big impact, just because the ag economy right now is not that great, and over the coming years not going to be that great. So this stuff is going to make a big impact and get a lot of farmers on board. And I think they will be. I think it's going to take more education, but I do think the dollars are big enough that it forces people to pay attention.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Mitchell, for joining us today. Like, we need to wrap it up there, but this has been great. I think this adds some great perspective for our investors, who may be focused a bit more downstream on really what the biofuel producers are doing. But this really helps to complete the whole picture, which is just so critical to understanding what motivates the entire supply chain, from farm to fuel, as we would say, right? And also to a certain extent, how things might settle in Washington in terms of policies. But anyway, thanks so much for joining us. We hope you can come back again with us sometime.
Yeah, anytime. Last one quick little thing is, I think having exactly what you just ended there with, thinking about the whole supply chain, it's about growing the pie. And I believe if there is transparent, equitable share, more folks will come to the table, we'll grow the pie, and the slice will be bigger for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So thanks so much. Thanks again, Mitchell. For our listeners, please stay tuned. I'll pass on to Sean in just a moment to introduce our next speaker.